This is the Canna Show, a podcast chronicling the inspiring stories of real women in the emerging cannabis industry. Your host, Joyce Gerber, mom, lawyer, political activist, has been speaking with women from coast to coast and around the world who are leaders in the revolution of cannabis and caregiving, continuing on her mission to lift up the stories of the women creating the cannabis industry by sharing their canna stories with you. So go make yourself a cup of tea or roll yourself a joint, sit back, and learn something new about this magical plant on The Canna Show with Joyce Gerber.
From the Tip O'Neill Studios in North Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's The Canna Show. Now here's your host, Joyce Gerber.
And welcome back to The Canna Show for my very last episode as your host, where we have been talking about caring for and giving voice to women in the emerging cannabis industry, one canister at a time, since 2019, Dave.
Wow. By my count, that's 5 years or more.
That would be 5 years.
That would be 5 years.
So this may be my last time hosting the Canna Show, but of course I will be continuing on our mission of crushing cannabis stigma for caregivers who love cannabis and, you know, should have no stigma around them. So just not sure what I'm doing yet, but I will still be around because this feels like a fight we can win.
I think we're winning the fight. The fight's a lot different than when you started, that's for sure. You've made a couple dents, but I feel like you should be making the Lou Gehrig speech at this point. You know,
I know.
Consider myself the luckiest Canna mom on earth.
Yeah. So as Dave accurately said, it has been 5 years. And you know, like I said, I'm not going to be doing this, but I'll be doing what I've always been doing. I'm staying connected to politics. Like I do record from the Tip O'Neill Studios in North Cambridge, and making quilts. I'll be writing books. I actually have another idea for my my canna fiction. So that might be,
yeah.
I think it's like a whole new genre.
Well, is it? Well, you invented it, so
yeah, so
you get to decide.
I do, that's true. And then, you know, playing tennis keeps me healthy.
Yes. I'm sure you'll keep busy, but man, will we miss the Canna Mom Show.
Yeah. So Dave will be joining us. I don't know. He has something special. I think it's going to in a couple of minutes, but he's going to be joining us today because we're going to reminisce about the early days. You know, we started this pre-pandemic. Remember back pre-pandemic days? Yeah. We've had several different studio spaces. We've switched hosting sites. We've learned how to use YouTube.
Yes.
It's been a learning curve. You know, it keeps you alive and happy. Change, can't get habituated, something like that. Yeah. So
think of all that's happened. I don't want to jump the gun here, but
yeah,
you know, we had one of the more memorable episodes was with your mom, and it's sad to think that she's no longer here. But what a nice salute you had to her that now exists, you know, digitally forever.
Oh, yeah,
the Canna Nana.
I gotta say that is probably, well, we'll talk about more later. But yeah, one of my favorite episodes, absolutely, without a doubt, was getting my mother on the podcast because that was not expected. All right, so I am going to interview Dave. I have a couple other guests, but I'm going to do a little bit of like a reminisce. Dave, do you remember when we used to like talk about products with Amy?
I do. Yes.
Amy had her own. She had her own page, Amy's Favorite Things, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so that was her part of the thing. And we don't really review products lately, but I'm going to do something because I love this, and I don't know, I just got it. So so those of you who cannot see me because you aren't on YouTube, I'm holding up a lovely ceramic container that has a cover. That
small bowl with a lid. Yep.
It's an ashtray. It's beautiful and
wow.
It's functional. So this is, as a Canna mom, I hate a mess. I don't like to see dirty ashes everywhere. But you know, you do that and it falls right in. It's very functional. You don't see it.
So there's like a decorative lid that and the lid is kind of like a donut. It's got a hole in it, so you can tip your ashes right in there.
You're much better describing than I
it.
am. Yes. So I got it on Etsy. I think it's from Turkey. My seller's name was, I have it, OGUZ. Oguz?
Okay.
I don't know. It could be a rough one. It could be AI. Who knows? But anyways, it's on Etsy. I'll put the link in the website. Everyone's getting these this year. They're just like my new favorite little thing. If I still had to write, you know, the
Very
page.
cool. It looks really handmade and a lot of detail in the design.
It says handmade on the bottom, so maybe it actually is. Yeah. Joyce's favorite things. I don't know. I haven't really talked about products in so long. I forgot that I used to do it.
Right.
Favorite things. And before we get to Dave, all right, you know what? I'm going to do one more culture corner, and then we are going to get to our guest and you and all the other exciting things. So, yeah, Culture Corner.
The Culture Corner.
Okay. So I am not personally a comic book fan, and my daughter used to read graphic novels, and I would get mad at her for doing it. But I have learned I'm wrong. It counts as reading. And I do appreciate the art of storytelling. So I'm Jewish, as I mentioned occasionally, and I just love to support my people. And I'm from Boston, so it's our thing. So I had to give a shout out to The Writer. It's a comic book set in Boston and rooted in Jewish folklore. It is created by brothers Ben and Max Berkowitz of the Legal Seafood Dynasty. But in the article I read in the Globe, because I read the paper, it said it was his paternal grandfather, Nathan Glick, who inspired their love of comic books. So these brothers teamed up with Grammy-winning and Tony-nominated actor Josh Gad to create the graphic novel. And obviously I haven't read it, but I do love the idea of taking a deep, looking deep into Jewish folklore that's been around for thousands of years. We all know that, and making it like an Indiana Jones adventure. They're just celebrating Jewish identity in its broader way. And I just feel like in these times, I don't know, it's just really important
So
to have
cool.
these kind of stories. Yeah, I was really impressed with it. So
What's Josh Gad's role though?
I think he's helped with the writing, but maybe they're going to transform it into an action movie.
He's a big shot ever since he was in Frozen. He was the snowman in Frozen. Yeah.
So I don't know, just The Writer. It's a comic
Very
book.
cool.
It's Boston based. I don't think there's any cannabis in there, but there could be somewhere.
Cannabis graphic novel. That's the next genre you'll invent.
That's interesting.
Maybe they have that. I don't know.
We need a Canna hero. A Canna hero. All right.
Canna
maybe
man.
we'll talk about that. A Canna man.
Or Canna woman.
Just a Canna mom superhero. It'll be a Canna mom superhero.
I like it. Big pink cape.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's good. All right. I'm gonna go down there. All right. So today. All right. So people, do you ever wonder about the behind the scenes of the Canna Mom show? How did we find Dave? Why do we have the intro we do?
Why did we find it? Yeah.
Why do we? How does all the magic of podcasting distribution work? What are the challenges of social media and cannabis? And what could the future look like for the Canna Mom show? And what will I be doing next year? Well, today you're going to find out those answers to all those questions and more. Today, we're inviting my Canna bro, David Yas, to reminisce about the early days of the Canna Mom show and what we've learned. Also, if you've ever wanted to do your own podcast, we're going to ask Dave for a few pointers and how Pod 617 could be a great place for you to start. And we're talking to Kristin Souza, who's been working with the Canna Mom show this year on our social media and marketing. She's going to talk about what she's learned about podcasting this year and how she's planning to continue the Canna Mom show conversations in the future. And if that were not enough, in addition, we are also excited to talk with Dr. Benjamin Caplan right here in Boston about his work educating the medical world on cannabis and the podcast he's pitching and how I'm hoping to contribute. Please welcome to the final interview of season 5, our producer, David Yas, our social media manager, Kristin Souza, and Dr. Benjamin Caplan. Welcome.
We're all delighted to be here, Joyce, in case that was not clear.
All right, so we are all here. So I'm gonna do this little linear because I'm a linear storyteller. But let's just start. Let's each of you go around. Introduce yourselves, your name, where you're joining us from, and when did you first learn about the Canna Mom show? Let's start with Dave and go to Kristin, and then Dr. Caplan. How's that?
Well, I'd be delighted to start. David Yas, the founder and CEO of the Boston Podcast Network. And it is a company with a studio in Westwood, Mass, but clients all over the world. Joyce, you were one of my first clients and my greatest client ever that I'm going to miss so much. And we produce podcasts. That's what we do. Professionals and others and entrepreneurs and dreamers hire us to see their vision for a podcast come to life, and we take care of recording and all the details. So
there's a lot of details.
There's a lot of details from editing to recording and creating cool little musical interludes and such. And just looking back on the 5 years, I thought you deserved to take a bow, Joyce. So if you'll indulge me, I prepared a brief little musical salute to you. Can we do that now? Or?
Musical salute, absolutely.
All right. Here we go.
Cannabis world was once an enigma. Enter the Canna show, busting the stigma. Joy started as a bud and blossomed into a plan. She said, yes, we can, when others said you can. With each episode, a journey unfolds. Talking weed, pot joints, and stories untold. Joyce's voice, a beacon in the haze, empowering women in the cannabis craze. Oh, Joyce deserves a round of applause for 100 episodes with barely a pause.
More than 100.
She's a pillar, a queen in the cannabis game, blazing trails and pre-rolls without any shame. From grow rooms to boardroom, she's made a mark, interviewing women who ignite the spark. In the heart of each story, a nugget of gold, a community force, fearless and bold. With each toke of insight, a stereotype dies. Her listeners literally reaching all-time highs. Joyce's laughter, the soundtrack to a magical herd. Heard loud in countless cities and suburbs. From bartenders to CEOs, she's heard them all. Lifting curtains, letting true colors fall. Normalizing topics once seen as bizarre. She even raffled off a kick-ass hemp guitar.
Yeah.
The Canna show, a testament strong to Joyce's spirit, where she belongs. A legacy built not just in words, but in hearts and minds where freedom soars. So here's the joy in her incredible feat. Our podcast journey, pure and sweet. May the flow rise high, may the joys grow free. In the garden of joy, where we all wanna be.
There you go.
My God, Dave, that was awesome. Maybe I can get Josh to record that.
It's pretty good, right? I admit I had some help from some robots, so I guess I'm the co-writer of that. The other one is not human, so it's amazing what you can do now with a little bit of know-how.
I'm putting out to Josh. It's gonna make me record. Oh my, that is hysterical. Thank you so much, Dave. That is
You're
just
welcome. From the heart, Joyce. From the heart.
Oh, that's all right. I'm back, people. Okay. Kristen. All
That's a tough act to follow.
all I really wanted was like your name, your like where you're from, and
That was so good.
the show's over. No,
Go
okay,
big.
yeah.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home, people. Go big or go
Love
home.
it.
All right, Kristen.
So anyway, hi. I am Kristin Souza, and I am logging in today. I live in Middletown, Connecticut. So that is, where I'm filming from. And then, as far as when did I learn about the Canna Mom show, I feel like I've always known about you, to be honest. But I'm thinking back, and it was probably about 3-ish years ago.
Okay.
Being in social media, I think I stumbled upon you the first time either on YouTube or Instagram, and then through networking in this industry, you just know so many great women. And so our paths started crossing that way. So yeah, I feel like I've known about the show for a few years. I've gotten
Beth
to know
Waterfall
you.
was our early adopter.
100%.
Yeah. So that's why for her.
I'm 99% sure the first time I saw you may have been at Boston NECAN when I was working under Beth. So I was helping, she's the programming director there, and I was helping with the stage wrangling. So I'm pretty sure we bumped into each other there and then sat together for Jim Belushi.
Yeah, I think I was wearing this jacket too. I'm glad I
Oh,
still
that's
fit.
great.
And Dr. Benjamin, where are you joining us from? And how did you
Hey,
first hear about the Canna
sure.
show?
I hail from the suburbs of Boston, in Needham now. And I think you and I connected first probably on Clubhouse,
Oh, right.
early in post-pandemic sort of what are we doing? How do we reach intimacy and connect with other people?
Yeah.
And I've been a big fan ever since on social media.
I almost forgot about the Clubhouse years. That was actually probably what kept the podcast going that first year, all those people. All right, so there we go. We're from New England. We're all here, but we're all fond about the Canna Mom show. So Dave, go back to you. Do you remember? Do you remember how we got connected the first time?
Well, I mean, you and I didn't know each other very well, but we definitely knew we were acquainted.
But not like in life. Like I know you knew my brother and stuff. But do you remember like the podcast connection? Do you remember how that kind of came?
No.
I don't think I do. I think it was Jill Gordon.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was leaving. I was starting the podcast, and she said, "Hey," and this is my Jewish geography, of course, everyone. Dave just started a podcast studio, and Dave was also in the legal world where I was, so we've been connected. And he knows my brother, so it's been a long story. And then we used to go in, yeah.
Yeah. You did the first time we did it was in our studio in Westwood, I guess.
Yeah.
Because for a while we recorded at other places like the Podcast Garage. Did we ever record there?
No, so that's where I started. So I started the Podcast Garage in Arlington, and then it just again, there's a lot of details to podcasting. I didn't know anything about podcasting or cannabis when I started, and I certainly didn't know anything about like social media. So the podcasting minutia of like how you get in a hosting site, how do you record it, how do you edit it, and then how do you get it distributed, and there's a lot of minutia that I was doing at the Podcast Garage with me and Amy, my original co-host, and we realized we needed some extra help.
I remember you asking me sort of when it drops, and I said, well, we can set each episode to drop on Thursday at like 1 a.m. And you said, can we release it at 4:20 a.m.? Well, I don't know if we actually did that, but it was a good question.
That's like discrimination. They only let you do it on the half hour.
I know, yeah. They usually don't let you do it on the 10-minute marks, but so sometimes 4:30, close to 4:20.
4:20 discrimination. There's another battle we could probably win. Okay. All right. So we talked a little. We have a lot of guests, so I have a lot of questions. But all right. So we talked a little bit. You mentioned my mom. So from season 1, that was definitely my favorite episode. Was my mom, because honestly, she wasn't even supposed to be on the show. She was just coming to work with me that day. And
the Canna Nana.
Yeah, and it was my mother again. I kind of kid that she thought I was in a drug cartel. Just could not accept what I was doing, but. My mother lived in Dedham, and she thought it was interesting that I was doing a podcast, and she was in her 80s at the time, and you're up a flight of stairs. I remember that. And she wanted to come to work with me that day, so we were like making sure she could make it up the stairs. And then it was right at the beginning. She was the last one I recorded because it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And the person I had scheduled literally canceled as I was driving to your studio.
Oh.
And I got my mother to sit down. Or you maybe, I don't know. Someone got my mother to sit down and put the earbud, and then we started talking about cannabis. And I have it on tape, and that's literally a conversation I would never have ever in a million years with my mother. And
well, that is, sorry to be like rah-rah podcast guy, but that is one of the great things about a podcast is you can invite someone on your show who maybe, I mean, it's your mom, so you've had many conversations with her, but you could have conversations on podcasts that you wouldn't necessarily have just in life. And sometimes you learn a lot about people that way. And I learned a lot about your mom that day. She was just very sweet, and one of my favorite shows. She was delightful. And also just remembering, it's weird that feels like a lifetime ago, because it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I remember just like, I was like, what am I supposed to do? I just think I just got some fantastic and sprayed it around the office a little bit, and like, well, it's all clean here, I guess. Little did we know it was going to be a bigger deal than we thought. So
and that it miraculously continued, because I have had this podcast in different rooms in my house, but this is officially where it is in my daughter's old bedroom. But that next week, I didn't know what to do because I couldn't come in, and my son was home, and he set this up because he had the mic and he had all the stuff, and we did 50 shows that first season.
Yeah, without missing a beat, and that was a time where all of my clients kind of did the same thing. So I had to, if I didn't know already how to do podcasts remotely, I had to learn quickly on the fly to keep my business afloat. And now it's just, we got it down. You have a good microphone. It broke only once on you, I think, during the show.
It literally fell down while I was talking, so I was trying to casually hold it, and that's when we were on YouTube. Like, it was not a big deal. Actually, I was holding it from below. I was holding it from below and just talking, and then the whole thing just kind of came crashing down. But I knew it was going to happen because I twisted something while I was doing, on the show, and I wasn't paying attention. And I've messed up I don't know. There's a lot of things I've messed up, but I know how to do it now. In the beginning, and every once in a while, Dave isn't here, and he does put me in the good hands of John from
John
Jag,
Gay, who's out in Detroit, Jag in Detroit. Yeah.
So Jag in Detroit. So we did have one issue. We couldn't get on the Zoom, but we worked everything out. And Dave and I have a backup because people would cancel, right? Like once a year, for the most part, everyone showed up. But once a year, someone would literally just flake. Like they would confirm they're going to be there. They said they're going to be there. We waited and they didn't. So we had a whole backup of like what we're going to do when that happens again.
Yeah, you and I just shot the breeze about something. I learned that from every once in a while I'd guest host for a radio host, and the guest would cancel, and I'd say to the producer, "What are we gonna do?" And he would say, "No, we're just gonna talk. We're gonna talk. Whatever we were just talking about, we'll continue the conversation." And that's what people want to hear—a good conversation.
And yeah, I did read my book once. I did a chapter from my
book. That's right.
That was a good one. Yeah.
Good.
All right, so. It's podcasting. It's a very interesting genre. It's a storytelling. It's production. It's video now. It's a lot of different things, but it's a way to get a message out. And it's a great marketing tool, honestly. That's really what it's for. Like if you have like a legal firm, whatever, it's a nice way for people to access it and see you. So if I knew somebody who's interested in podcasting, Dave, or wanted to start their own, what advice do you have right now for people? Because I've been doing this for 6 years, really. So it's really changed a lot.
Well, selfishly, I'd say just go to pod617.com, set up a meeting to talk to me, and then hire me to produce your show. But in truth, podcasting can be done. There's more details than you might think, but you certainly can do it on your own with a decent microphone, and you can get a good USB microphone for about $65 these days. You plug it right in. You probably... Now, if you're going to have guests in person, then you're talking about buying some more equipment. But if you're just going to do it remotely, it's very easy. I do recommend people use Zoom, even though there are other podcast platforms out there. There's nothing wrong with Zoom. It works just fine. It's been working fine with us for 5 years. And you want to mess around with the recording settings and make sure you got it right. But then off you go. And the most important thing is the content. So the bells and whistles are nice, and we have a great intro theme song, thanks to Josh Lampkin on this show. But the most important thing is have a good natural conversation with someone. As a host, I always recommend have some questions prepared, but don't be married to them. Because if you are, you're going to be looking down at your questions instead of listening to what your guest is saying. And your guest will tell you some amazing things. You know this, Joyce. The interview may go places that you never thought it was going to go, and that sometimes is the best little moments in podcasting. So that's, and then a lot of these, as far as getting the podcast on, we use Simplecast, which Joyce, you were introduced to by someone, but you know what? All of these are they're all good. They're all fine. Simplecast, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Podbean, they all sort of have their pluses and minuses. You'll probably end up paying about $12 a month or something for this. And they've become pretty intuitive on just uploading the show, and then it'll instruct you on how to get it out on all the platforms like we're on. A lot of people are doing video, so we do recommend that you get your podcast on YouTube, even if it's just a static image of a logo and the show.
There you go. Some good insights from I don't know, you're a pioneer, dude.
I guess.
And now cannabis. So you were kind of new in the cannabis world when I started. You had lots of questions. You experimented. You're now, you puff in the beginning.
Yeah.
What's been your biggest surprise? Maybe there's something that you didn't expect to learn, expect to know about it, or just for like when I came to you and I'm like, hey, Dave, I'm going to do a podcast about women in cannabis with Amy, who you knew.
Yeah.
What were you?
Yeah. Well, my experience was probably typical of people of my generation. I tried cannabis in college, enjoyed it here and there. It was never really my thing. My greatest surprise in the Canna Mom journey is probably just the kind of same experience that the public had concurrent with this period of time, meaning that as you say, and you've said 100 times, it's a plant, people. It's a plant. It can be, and along the way, you learn that it's not just for getting stoned and eating Doritos and watching Will Ferrell movies. It can be used for pain management, anxiety, people who suffer from PTSD, people who suffer from chronic pain. You know, if you're an introvert and you're nervous going to some kind of party, that can ease you into the experience. And so, so I do use. I'll take gummies from now and again. I sort of do it as needed, but I never would have thought to do that before. I always would have thought cannabis is something you do at a party for fun, and you end up laughing a lot.
And I know you're very involved with the autism world, and we've talked a lot about that. Has that surprised you? I mean, I don't know what you heard before.
Yeah, it's that part. You know, my son has autism. We haven't decided to try cannabis with Adrian.
I know, but we've been telling. I mean, the stories we've shared. Were you surprised when had you heard those before I started sharing them?
No, I hadn't.
Yeah,
I hadn't. And so and it's but you know it's a time to think out of the box. And you know, the history of medicine, just like the history of anything, is the history of being wrong. You know, the generations before us, you know, they thought bloodletting was a good idea and put leeches all over your body, and you know, and so, you know, when you sort of learn about these things as you grow older, you think, you know, I get a headache, I take some aspirin, you know, and so on and so forth. But it's always evolving, and so that's what's been so exciting about this show and about this journey. I think is, who knows, you know, how many people can be helped by this. You know, there are people like, I don't think it's a stretch to say, you look at the opioid crisis, and sadly how many people would still be with us if they were trying cannabis instead of opioids, right? You know, provided it's a match for what they need, but in many cases I think it would be.
So that's interesting. That is a big learning curve for that part. And I learned, and obviously I've been learning that too as we go along, which we'll be talking to Dr. Benjamin Caplan about more. So before I switch to Kristin, and you're happy to keep talking, add in stuff that you remember, what is your favorite way to consume?
Two. One is just gummies. I'll take like a half of a 5 milligram gummy, you know, here and there, you know, when as needed. But I do like to have a vape pen of some sort. This doesn't have cannabis in it now. This is like it's like a nervous tick. It's like, instead of smoking cigarettes, which I never took up, I vape. And so I do like to have a vape stick handy with some, what do you call it? The
oil cartridge. Yeah. Not dry vape. Yeah. All right.
Not dry vape. I've never had success with that. Although, I mean, I'm not against it, and I'm not against a joint, a pre-roll here and there. Yeah. But I don't like to smell at my apartment. So, no offense.
Oh, it's always about the smell, people. All right. Thanks, Dave. Oh my God, that was good. So he's going to be still here, maybe piping in if he has any questions or answers to things that we don't know about. All right, Kristin, thanks for joining us today. So you've been working with us for about a year now. You've been doing social media. You've been doing our graphics, our colors. We've had a couple of really big campaigns this year, bigger than I'd had in the past. We had the collaboration with My Bud Vase. We had, of course, the hemp guitar giveaway. We've had a lot of guests. So I don't know. Just want to talk a little bit about when you came on, and we sort of had a vibe. But how did you come up with your idea for the colors this year, for the images, the graphics? And have you always been visual? Has this been sort of your thing? Thanks for joining us.
You know, I think it is. I always used to joke. I'm like, I'm an art appreciator. I love painting, sculpting, glass art, but I couldn't draw a straight line if my life depended upon it. So I can visualize it. With social media and graphics, I'm not hand drawing anything. So it's, and back to cannabis, it makes me more creative. So I can sit down, smoke, your brain starts working in creative ways, and you'll be in the shower or making coffee, and all of a sudden it's that click, like, oh, that'd be fun. So that's how a lot of my ideas just kind of come to me. When you and I got together earlier this year, one of our first meetings was just sitting down and talking about kind of your vision and what you saw for your show. You had, prior people working on your social media, but you were saying some of the things that you did like, some of the things that you would have done differently. And so we sort of came up with a game plan together, using things from the past and incorporating new things. And that's how we came up with some of our graphics. And then the collaborations were great. Like you said, my bud vase was a very big one. And that was a lot of fun. Gosh, there were so many. There was one with Chef Nick with the infused food.
Oh yeah, we did do a lot this year. But that's been,
my God, the hemp guitar was a huge one. I mean, that was really pushing it out in different channels.
And I feel like it was like it really did sort of expand sort of the I don't know, the network of people we were connected with, because these stories were good and then we were connecting with the women's networks, but then we were connecting with people who were sort of outside of it. And the hemp guitar giveaway, that video that my son posted, it got over 1 million views just of him smoking out of that hemp guitar, and I don't love social media. I talk about this all the time. I've always had social media managers. It makes me a little nauseous. I'm 59 years old. It makes me feel bad about myself, and I should not feel bad about myself. So I hire people to help me.
No, 100%. We talk about that a lot.
And when we came on, I had always had sort of the, retro housewife, 1950s housewife vibe when we sort of started. The Canna Mom Show logo, which was created by Amy, who Dave and I were talking about earlier, was supposed to be temporary. It was just something she pulled together. And, it just kind of works with the cannabis leaf and the microphone and the color scheme. That was really her thing. And we've kind of kept it that way. So I don't know. What do you think? I think it's fun. I think it's engaging. I feel like I want the stories to be accessible, so I don't want people to feel like I'm talking at them. I'm a little didactic in real life, but on social media, I want to be more fun. So how do you achieve that?
It is an interesting challenge, but it's far from impossible. And I think a lot of things with social media, people get really caught up in the imagery and the perfect captions and all of that. And while that is very valuable and important to drive engagement, the main thing is just being social with people. Interact just like we are right now. I mean, a lot of times those
I will tell you, when I started with Amy, I actually didn't know that. I didn't know it was social. It didn't even occur to me that it's supposed to be I just didn't understand. And I'm like, oh my God, you're supposed to be like in high school and acknowledging everyone and talking to them. And it took me a while. So
hi Barbie. That's basically
why I wear pink. Anyway, so that is what you've been doing to help me. Yeah, because our engagement has been great this year.
Yeah. And and that's exactly it. Some folks really enjoy it. Other people can't stand it. There's some of us that fall in the middle. As a general rule, I do enjoy social media. To your point, I mean, there's studies for days that'll show it can affect your mental health. It depends. This content, this account, your podcast, it's fun and uplifting and positive. And that's where you need to focus your mental energy when you're doom scrolling. Don't do that. Go to things that make you feel better about yourself, that make you learn something. I like to follow accounts where I get educated on things. I like to follow accounts that are fun, that engage back. And also, you have celebrity status, Miss Joyce. So people love when they, I've seen my friends do like, oh, Joyce replied back to me. You know what I mean? Like people really enjoy that.
My daughter doesn't say that.
Well, neither does mine, but
oh, that's so funny. That's so yeah. I will say I felt very gratified. I can see how it's very addictive because this week everyone's been reaching out to me, and I put out a blog the other day, and all my middle-aged lady friends are getting back to me, and they never respond to anything. So people are, I feel like people have been connected to this. It makes me feel good that they're reaching back out to me, and you're still doing with it. So I don't know, digging into your big imagination. We've talked a little bit about what could happen next year. What do you think it's going to look like? The Canna Mom Show has become a brand. I always say I started it like the Daily Show. You're going to have different hosts, but it's just sort of like what you know what you're getting when you come here. So what do you think, I'm not going to be hosting anymore, but we have talked a little bit more about what we could do with the social media part of it and other things.
Yeah, I mean, carrying on the legacy of the Canna Mom Show, I think is really important. And you're seeing it yourself. There are so many women in the industry and men as well that are coming in and saying these stories have been transformational for them, that it provided a voice around issues that they were unaware of or hadn't seen discussed. Even still, I mean, many years into it, every state is kind of maturing at a different rate, but women are still very underrepresented in this industry. For a variety of reasons, whether it's as consumers, we're kind of underrepresented in dispensaries, as business owners. I mean, in general, women are in the C-suite less, but in cannabis, it's even more profound.
That's
and
insane,
then
which just makes me
it's insane.
It just makes me so angry. I can't even I just
Yeah,
feel
and
like
then
I am that generation. I'm 59 years old. We were told we could do everything. Lean in, have it
lean
all,
in, right?
do what you're supposed to do. And then this idea that's actually gotten like a little bit worse is just, oh my God. So yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then, to your point about when you were talking about like your next steps, right? Like focusing on politics and the policy legislation, federal rescheduling, things like that are going to continue to be very important. So even on an individual state level, you want to highlight women in the emerging industry, but at the same time, there are women that have been in the traditional market for 20, 30, 40 years. Their stories are very valuable as well.
And
Um,
preserving them. I think people are going to
and
forget. I mean,
preserving
this
them.
is going to be normalized. I mean, it's better now, but I shared stories of women who had to abandon their children in
Right.
wherever they were because they had to run from the law because they had been caught growing cannabis. And it's just that's not that long ago. Like they said, not that long ago, not that far away. So these women's stories that I hopefully will forget because it won't be like that anymore, have to be preserved. I always felt that's like a little grandiose, but I did feel like I was doing that too.
It's not that
Yeah.
grandiose, and I think you're right. And then again, being underrepresented, I could Google right now and I'll get a ton of hits on men, male activists in the cannabis space, male business owners. Finding those inspiring stories about women is a little bit more challenging and it's frustrating. But then there's folks like yourself in this show that have really amplified that and brought it to the forefront. And I think it's really important. I myself am a mom. I've got a 20-year-old daughter. She'll be 21 in October. Her sister just turned 11. So I've always said, too, with that 10-year age gap, each of my children have sort of experienced a different dynamic as far as
Hmm.
legalization. And so our children are going to be this next generation of women if they enter this industry or even consumers and part of society. So not only preserving stories, but there's always new stories too, right? Like we're going to be around forever.
And and again, whatever's wrong with our human brain, we adapt more, or we hear bad stories. We're able to access, or we're more likely to access bad stories than negative stories and positive. So, you know,
100%.
I just put something out that there were scientists who were doing some study on children from women who have been consuming cannabis and realized their brain function was not just okay, it was doing really well. But then I'll
Yeah,
see in the same, like, Google post thing that gives me all my like articles that week, 12 things about how terrible and scary cannabis is. So it's a little bit
right.
confusing to me, and I'm in the industry. So I don't know how we keep pushing out these good stories except by existing and like existing. I think these women who are doing it and you're breaking the stigma with their kids, that feels like the best way to do
100%.
it.
And to your point too, when you start searching things, your internal bias, for lack of a better word, is right, the things you look up, the things you read, the types of news articles you consume, your algorithm and your search engine is feeding you that type of information. So if you tend to be looking up things that are negative about cannabis, that's exactly the information you're going to get back. So if you tell someone to do their research and they're like, I found 10 articles that say this, yes, they did find those 10 articles. Were they reliable, reputable sources? So there's a lot that goes into it. We need to be the voice and show that, what I mean, we're professional, we're parents, we're holding it down, we're being responsible citizens and involved in our communities, and also we consume cannabis medicinally for fun and both, and that's okay.
It's just part of our lives. I know, that's awesome. All right, so we're gonna get onto Dr. Benjamin Kaplan in a second, but tell me a little bit about what you're doing in Connecticut with the cannabis world, how you think you can use your voice in this area, and what do how yeah, I guess that's it. How you gonna use your
Okay.
voice, and then we'll come back. Okay. Mhm.
It's been a little bit of a transition. So I currently own Sugar Leaf Creative, so it's a social media and marketing company. I've got a handful of clients. You're of course my favorite. And I do that. I help people get their brand message out a little bit more robustly. So whether that's helping with grand openings for dispensaries, assisting at some of their fundraising events for some of the nonprofits in the cannabis space, helping develop like the cross promotional campaigns that we did together. So I do a lot of that. I am also a co-host on a radio show in Connecticut. It's Cannabis Corner Radio. We air, it's 103.5 FM out of New Haven. So I have, an opportunity on a weekly basis to use my voice and, kind of throw my 2 cents in about what's happening in the state and nationally, in our industry. I joke, I'm like, I yell on the internet a lot. I think that is where I get the most attention, for lack of a better word. And I really like, exactly to your point, talking about like the study with the mothers and being pregnant and using cannabis. I like to highlight things like that. So as opposed to like, and no, there's a lot of pop culture in cannabis where we're talking about like the latest celebrity brand or this or that. I tend to try to highlight more things around medical. I am not a doctor. I have no medical training, but I pull other people's articles and kind of amplify their voice. So I've always said I'm more of a conduit of information. And I think kind of representation matters. I
yeah.
look very basic, sipping my lattes, you know what I mean? So I think I provide representation for a certain, niche segmented group that maybe doesn't feel like other
Exactly.
Canna moms look like them. Yeah.
I agree. All right, that's like sort of like that's our sweet spot. That there's women
Exactly.
who are just curious about it, need some access, and want to have somebody they feel they can trust. And we are those. That's our generation of women who are doing this. So, Kristin, thank
100%.
you for sharing that
Thank
with us. We'll come back on the other side. And I also want to share with you Dr. Benjamin Caplan, who I don't know. Why don't you just tell me a little bit what you've been doing in Boston? I know you're doing the cannabis education, and I know you're starting a podcast. So let's talk, and then we can talk a little bit about the mission of your podcast, because I do say I really know nothing about the human body, but I do know about the endocannabinoid system, which I talk about endlessly. But you actually understand how the human body works. So yeah, your
Right on. Yeah,
podcast
no,
would
so
help.
I'm a normal family physician, board certified, licensed. My transformation into cannabis happened in clinic. I was working at the suburbs, in the suburbs at some of the premier hospitals in Massachusetts, and learned from my patients that cannabis was helping them. I didn't know anything because none of us really did. We were all totally blinded by the system that we grew up in, from, culturally as well as doctors. But I dove into the literature that I heard wasn't there, or there was no literature, which of course is baloney. There's 10 times more published papers about cannabis and the components of cannabis than the common cold or Lyme disease.
But
And
can I ask you about that? So what I keep hearing is there's lots of studies, but they're always trying to find the negative, but they can never find the negative, which is why people aren't really like citing them. Or I don't
that used to be
understand.
true. That used to
Yeah.
be true. And you guys were talking about that. The sort of pile of negative articles was funded by the National Institute for Drug Abuse for many years.
Okay.
Since the 50s, 60s, there was a lot of political motivation to show evils of cannabis, and there wasn't much funding to show positives. But that's really gone mostly by the wayside over the last 3-4 years. We now have about 5,000 or 6,000 papers every year coming out about cannabis.
Oh.
And as Kristin mentioned, you can choose to find papers to support almost any argument. And that's normal, actually. That's how good science should be. And it really takes, pardon the pun, weeding through these papers to find the main vein. And that's really where I came to write the doctor-approved cannabis handbook. It's a 300-page sort of Bible of benefits of cannabis. There's tons of books out there that show some aspect that's nice or some aspects that's pretty. None of the books that I've ever read show a protocol for how to make cannabis successful for specific medical conditions. So I covered, in very brief overview, the history and sort of how we're in this mess. But the bulk of the book is how do you take cannabis and make it useful for you.
I saw when you were bringing this up with your other medical professionals, were people pushing back on you? Were they telling you like had smoked
Yeah.
too much
People thought
pot?
I needed an
Yeah.
intervention.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course. I mean, we're all bit by the baloney bug.
Yeah.
We were taught that cannabis was a stepping stone to becoming a prostitute or another druggie or something.
Oh yeah.
And
So what
and of
year?
course,
I say my cannabis awakening was 2016. When did you actually start to see that this was something maybe you were wrong about?
2012 in clinic. I mean, I
Okay,
was a
you're
square
okay, yeah.
nerdy doctor. I didn't expose myself to it. I grew up studious and square. But that's how I found my way to cannabis, actually, was through the studious and square. I mean, the studies are there. And if you're a critical, skeptical reader, you'll see right through the haze.
So I will say, I've interviewed other medical professionals who've come to us a little bit later in life, usually because of their own health issues. But I have met once in a while someone who will say to me, I can tell who's using cannabis in cancer treatment, and I would say how, and they say because they look good.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife today, and I mentioned a sort of realization that the older patients that I see, I have a clinic with 18,000 patients, and the older folks I see are in their 90s and hundreds. I have a dozen over
Wow.
100, and the one thing that they have that's common is that they're all really happy and kind and warm and friendly. We don't have any curmudgeony people who are that age, and it's sort of cheating actually, because when you take cannabis, you are infusing yourself with joy. I mean, you know, of course, some people have it anyway. Those happy-go-lucky people we all know, they have a naturally high tone of endocannabinoids that they're born with. But for the rest of us, we sometimes have to supplement and create happy lives and content, joyful, comfortable lives with cannabis.
I like that analogy. So I was listening to a science podcast the other day trying to talk about cannabis, and a lot of things I do know what indica and sativa aren't real. Some of the studies aren't real, but when they were talking about cannabis for depression or anxiety, their pushback on it is that it was temporary. But I'm like, isn't it all temporary? Isn't that the point of medication? It's temporary. So why is it a pushback on cannabis and not against other medications? I thought it was like a funny way
Yeah,
to
no,
talk
no,
about it.
there is a temporary effect, which is what you feel while you're consuming it. But over time, you create new nerve connections, you create new emotions, you create new pathways of joy and comfort.
But that's what I thought too. I thought for me, it feels like it gives you the space to actually step back from the pain, step back from the anxiety, and create a
Mhm.
way to like live in the world so you don't always need it. But the way they talked about it was, it did. People who smoked or consumed felt much better. But then the
Yeah.
pushback was, but it's not. It just felt like it was.
Science has always
Yeah.
had a problem with perspective. You know, we all
Yeah.
heard that cannabis was bad for sperm motility, it was bad for fertility because it reduced sperm count. I mean, that's true if you stay looking under a microscope. When THC and sperm are connected, the sperm swim a little bit slower. It's not deadly. It's just they get stoned.
They're happy.
Um,
They're
but
relaxed.
if you zoom out and you look at the public health data, the countries which have the greatest access to cannabis have the best fertility, and people are more comfortable engaging in bedroom activities. They feel better about themselves. They're happier. They're actually better able to enjoy sex. So of course they end up being more fertile. But you wouldn't realize that if you only stuck looking under a microscope.
That's an interesting perspective. All right, we should have some time. That's right. Let's talk about your podcast. So you had this idea. You're a doctor. You're pretty busy. You're writing books. I'm sure you've got other stuff going on in your life, but you thought podcast. I'm going to add this to my life. So what is the mission of your what's the mission of your podcast? Who are you trying to reach? And yeah, what kind of subjects do you want to cover? And I am not a doctor. I talk about this like it cures everything. I know it doesn't. People ask me all sorts of questions. I do understand what the endocannabinoid system is now. So is that part of your mission to help educate doctors on that, or what is the mission of the podcast?
I mean, as you guys were talking about earlier, the theme of cannabis these days, among I think those of us in some sort of leadership position, the theme is about conversations we've never had. And my sense of it is that there are people all over the world who learn differently, and some people read a lot and they'll like a book, or some people want to do a newsletter and they'll do that. You know, a
Right.
lot of people learn by listening, and having a podcast reaches people who just that's what they do on their way to work or to drop the kids or something. So I decided podcast was the way to go. Gosh, about a little over a year ago, and I've been recording. I haven't published anything yet, but I've recorded dozens of my patients to get their stories, real stories from real people
Well, that's a good
on the
idea.
airwaves, because the things I hear in clinic blow me away. I mean, we were talking about David's children and autism. I'm see over 100 families with pediatric autism, and I have some of these parents for whom cannabis has saved them from institutionalizing their children. Many of them feel like they're wardens in their own prisons of their home, because the children are very regimented. They don't like changes to their routine. And cannabis has not only helped the children become more flexible with their routine and sort of ease into a night of sleep, but give the parents a vacation too from this sort of, unrelenting life. It's changing people's lives is the punchline, and nobody knows about it. I mean, we all saw Sanjay Gupta's piece on CNN, and that was interesting, but they're very aggressive autistic children, and those are not the majority. I mean, there are some of those, but the bulk are not that aggressive, and it doesn't have to be so dramatic. But a lot of these families still feel powerless, or sort of have few options. The medical industry is either too congested or overwhelmed or not available to see them. And cannabis is an amazing option for these families, and nobody knows about it. So here I am, this doctor in my own kind of clinic world, and I'm trying to scream the message about how amazing this can be for families when they understand what they're doing, when they have guidance, when it's treated like a medicine. So my podcast is currently called the Green Table Talk Podcast, sort of mirroring what Jada Pinkett Smith did with the Red Table. But the idea is really anything can go on that table. And we want to learn where cannabis is going. We know a little bit about where it's been, but boy, we've barely scratched the surface here. I have some patients, for example, that are playing with some of the terpenes that are found in cannabis, namely alpha pinene and eucalyptol. We know of those as the smell of pine needles and eucalyptus leaves, but those actually have helped some of my patients with asthma. And instead of needing the pharmaceuticals that their doctors are prescribing them, maybe they use those also, but they're exploring how natural plant versions of things that can open up their airways are making them feel better. And that's totally new. I mean, science doesn't know anything about that. We've never seen that before. It's not been studied. And I get to explore that with my patients in a safe way and then share it to the world.
I love that. That's all right. All right. So again, back in the day when my mother thought I was in a drug cartel, I had my friend Dr. Bridget Williams from Ohio, who is also a medical professional who had the same sort of experience as you. In her clinic, she kept seeing people who were being healed and didn't know what it was and went down this path. So when my mother heard her speak and some family members, they're like, oh, a doctor talks about it.
Right.
It must be real. So I do feel like you do have more gravitas in terms of like people listening to you as opposed to, me.
Yeah, no, there's something magical about the white coat, and I think the 20 odd years I spent,
Yeah.
studying and learning and treating people well, and I think there's
Yeah.
a guillotine, I guess, of trustworthiness that comes when the whole system has trusted you for so long in such a public way. There's a vulnerability there, and
Right.
of course I'm all over social media, so people can inspect my views very plainly. But one of the crazy things about me as a doctor is that I know that I know nothing, and the more that I learn, I feel like I really scratched the surface, almost infinitesimally small. And I think humility goes a long way for people. And I think when they see that I don't think I know everything, that I don't think I have all the answers, I'm just here to learn and share what I'm learning with the public. I think people are drawn to that.
That's powerful. And I will say in cannabis, probably in life, but if you say you're an expert, they're lying. It's honest to God. Like the things we thought, it just, no one's an expert. And you want someone who's curious and kind because they're going to have questions and they're going to keep, asking things. So,
Right.
I just had a quick question about you about a story I read, and then we actually are going to have to wrap up. So I saw this story in New York about a boy, the vape pen, and they quoted you in there. You were, commented on. So these are the kind of stories that are spreading, and everyone thinks things are so dangerous. So I saw your quote, but just can you like give a little recap and like
Sure.
how do we counter this sort of thing? I mean, I don't know what else is going on in this boy's life, but it probably wasn't the vape pen. I liked your quote that he would probably sit down and whatever.
So actually it's a complicated story. It's a 17-year-old from New York with unknown history. Seemed like a normal 17-year-old guy, very athletic, normal socially. But he was found dead in the setting of consuming a vape pen that was never really found, and some friends that have hid behind lawyers, and it's not really clear sort of the cause of death. It's been determined that it was not criminal activity, but it's not super clear. We do have blood tests from him. We know roughly what his average use of cannabis was. And, given the science that we understand from toxicology testing, it seemed like he was a regular user. I could deduce that from his toxicology reports. But we don't know if there was foul play involved. There is a real thing, which is cannabis psychosis. And in some people who have predisposition to psychosis, cannabis can bring that out. Just like, if you're walking in a mall, sometimes flashing lights at a certain frequency of a fluorescent bulb can cause a seizure. That doesn't mean we get rid of all, lights, but the same thing can happen with fragrances. Some of us are just triggered by substances in a way that brings out what we're used to, what we're predisposed to. And my hunch is that's what happened with Nico. It's his name, but his mother is of course distraught, not having answers, and it's very tempting to put the blame on something. And cannabis is sort of so new for our modern culture and the brainwashing we've all had, that I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that, look, there are lots of possibilities on both sides of this. Cannabis could be in part responsible, but it's also not to blame. And I think we have to have that delicate approach where we are skeptical, but not quick to judge and blame.
Yeah, I think it was it's a hard balance, especially for young people. And I do know there's more studies about like how it does impact young brains, but I think it's interesting that it helps older brains. I mean, that's just awesome, honestly.
Yeah, but brains are all growing. It's not like, kids are growing more, sure, but some older brains are growing fast too. And cannabis has potential to do harm, just like it has potential to do well. And that's
Yeah.
true of water, and that's true of binge watching TV and everything. People don't have to be scared of dependence.
So that's interesting. All right, so we do have to wrap it up, but all right. So your podcast, the mission is to sort of spread the gospel of the stories you're hearing, so people do know. When are people be able to hear it? When they're going to be out?
So I actually have a very famous radio station that's inspecting it to see if they want to carry it before I launch it privately. So we'll see, to be determined. But of course, Joyce, I'd love to have you on the show and bring whatever women power we can. I have 2 daughters and want the world to see a different, more equal version as we get older. But yeah, no, it's coming soon, to be determined.
To be determined. All right, in the show notes when it is. All right. So last thing, I don't know. Do any of you have questions for me? Things you've been now that I'm stepping away. Any questions you're trying to ask me about the podcast, my tennis game, anything?
I'd ask you, what are you most proud of?
Oh, that I kept going. I mean, I was thinking back. So I always say this is sort of accidental. In my little essay saying goodbye, I said maybe it was divine intervention. I have no idea. But that, I will admit, I was in sort of a sad place when I started this because my daughter was just left for college. I was an empty nester. The job I had been working on turned out not to be the best place for me. And I was a little bit, I used to say isolation, desperation, and a lot of rejection got me right here. But, and then I hooked up with Amy and we were like, Thelma and Louise just doing this thing. You just have one person who believes in you, and there was a vision and we kept going and I built this really big community. It's been nice. I think I'm proud of that I kept going. I had something I said I was going to do and I did it.
Well, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
And my other question would be, what lessons have you learned along the way, or anything? You asked me the same question basically, but as far as the fundamentals of what cannabis is and what it can do and the good it can do, that's one thing. But I wonder if you sort of learned, if you get philosophical, you learned sort of any life lessons about people.
Oh yeah. I mean, I do think there's something about kindness and curiosity. And I was a divorce attorney. I was a bitch. I did not live in a nice world. And love, kindness, wisdom, and hope were not words we ever used. Honestly, I mean, you were a lawyer too. So to found this world and to meet all these women who are really uplifting, I mean, it shouldn't be such a shock, but I was really still of the generation. There was one woman in a room. You had to act like the boys. You had to pretend like you didn't have kids. And I always envisioned my vision of the caregiver, that this idea that our plant, she is a caregiver, and the women mostly are the caregivers, and we could build an industry around our values instead of women having to fit in and caregivers having to fit into a world that literally doesn't want us. So that's what I hope will happen. I hope maybe it's like we've sort of done a step forward that, again, men can do whatever they want. They just don't want us in that world. It wasn't created for us. We can do our own thing. People can join us, but there's enough of us now. Like, I'm the beginning of a new generation. No one even knows we're here. Gen X.
Yeah.
We all, like Maura Healey, I say this all the time. Maura Healey was my classmate at law school. She is now governor of the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But half of my law school class, we stepped back when we had children because the caregiving is really not that, it's not really valued in the way we think it should be.
Well, I like that the theme of kindness running throughout your show, because I think that's a good point. And, Kristin, something you said was like, social media can be, it giveth and it taketh away. It can be an evil thing. And, we've probably all seen documentaries now about how things can go really awry, particularly with young people being, bullied on social media. However, there's a lot of kindness on social media too, and because of all that vitriol out there that's being spread like rapid fire, and the way, sadly, our country seems more divided now than ever, kindness goes a long way. It goes a long way. And so, like, I feel like I knew that once a week I was going to be on here and at least get a dose of kindness, which is it's underrated. It's free to be kind to people. It doesn't cost anything, you know.
I wonder if that's part of the reason the cannabis industry is so strong, actually, that the community is so sweet and kind and embracing and has struggled through so many years that they really know the fruit.
Yeah. And I just say it's about the women leaders. So the women who are stepping up to lead are almost universally, the women I talk to are healed. They have healed themselves or healed someone they love. And they are, I say they're either evangelized or just pissed. They didn't know about this before, you know, and they're in this for the long run. And who doesn't want to have an industry led by healed people who have a clear vision of where they want this to go, you know, whatever. And homeostasis, you know, again, maybe just I used to say this is the Venn diagram of politics. Everyone gets sick. Everybody can use the, you know, what do they say? The devil's lettuce. You know, maybe it can bring us back to the middle. I used to be pissed that we were such a middle country, but now I want us back here. I want us back solidly in the middle.
I'll take it.
So if cannabis and hemp, which, you know, could save America and the world, could, like, you know, bring us back, I'm all for it. And I'll keep fighting for that. That's my mission. All right. Anyone else? Are all good? Oh, so sad. Thank you. All right. I guess that's it. Thank you for joining me on my final episode of the Canna Mom Show. So that's it, people. For my guests, Kristin and Dr. Caplan, and of course my Canna bro, David Yas, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the Canna Mom Show, where we have been on a mission to enhance the impact women have on the emerging cannabis industry by sharing and preserving their stories of love, kindness, wisdom, and hope. And I do hope that is our legacy. Thank you for following and sharing the inspiring stories of the women building this new industry, so together we will crush that stigma around cannabis and caregivers. I'm your host, Joyce Gerber. This is the Canna Mom Show, and we're a production of Pod 617, the Boston Podcast Network. Thank you. 5 magical years. Thank you.